Hello everybody. Welcome to EPG Pathshala. Today we are going to discuss about the sanskaras of women. This paper is part of the module Women and History, coordinated by Professor Rekha Pandey. The name of the paper is Legal Position, Rituals and Sanskaras for Women in the Vedic Period. It is written by Archana Verma. And I am Dr. Rashmi Bachu. I am associated with University of Hyderabad and I shall be discussing this paper in detail. So this paper basically covers 3 to 4 points which I shall be elaborating in the course of this talk. Basically it has introduction, and the second part deals with various perspectives and the critiques to the women position during the historical time, especially the Vedic period. The third and the most important part deals with the various sanskaras related to women in the as prescribed in the Vedic texts and how it was dealt with in practicality during those periods. So various aspects related to the Vedic sanskaras for women will be discussed in this paper. Especially the sub-points include the 16 Vedic sanskaras. Of course, there are differences. Some texts refer to 18 samskaras, whereas some refer to 12. But by and large, 16 samskaras are considered to be the ideal for both men as well as women. That is something we shall be discussing. In the course of this paper, I shall also be discussing about the system of niyoga in the Vedic period. That is the system of the widows marrying a male relative, especially a brother of her deceased husband, to beget children or sons rather. We shall also be discussing about rights of women during the Vedic period and what was the position of women's rights with regard to various aspects. I shall also be towards the end giving some directions for future research in this particular area. The Indian history, as we all know, is divided basically into 3 sections: the ancient period, medieval period and the modern period. And women's history of late has become one of the major aspects which is being studied by historians as well as other academics. Now, in order to understand the position of the women and the struggle that began in the last 50 odd years for her rights has its root in the historical period, and that is why it becomes imperative to understand the historical role of women and how it has been either described in the text, but more than description, the role of women has been understood through its absence, the absence of the voices of women. And this is something very important because the voice is considered to be the medium through which a human being as collectively as well as individually can express themselves. And by suppressing this very voice, historically the society has been not very progressive or not very encouraging towards the women. As I said, the historical period is divided into 3 periods: ancient, medieval and modern. And it is only in the modern period that women have been given certain importance, or rather it is the women who have come forward to take their rights and reassert their importance. Today's paper, in today's paper, we deal with the ancient period, or more specifically the Vedic period. The Vedic period is believed to be the earliest part of the civilization of India, and it comprises of a period, say, around about 1500 before Common Era up to 800 before Common Era. Of course, the dates are variable, but this is the standard date that is taken. And as we can see, it's a very long period. And again, the Vedic period is divided into 2 parts: the early Vedic period or the Rig Vedic period and the later Vedic period, where the rest of the 3 Vedas were written, and the society supposedly reflects in these texts. So, as I said, the Rig Vedic period, or the early Vedic period, comprises of it is comprised in what is reflected in the text, the Rig Veda, and other than this, we find that many texts were composed during the Vedic period. Of course, the Vedas are the basis, but beyond that, we also have the Upanishads, the Brahmanas, and the Aranyakas, which were subsidiary texts compiled on the basis of what was there in the Vedas, or what was understood from the Vedas. And all these texts reflect different kinds of viewpoints with regard to women's role in the society. Within these texts, we find diverse kind of viewpoints propounded by the various authors. We need to understand that the corpus of Vedic texts is a heterogeneous kind of a text. So we cannot say that all the texts say the same thing, or all other authors were of the same viewpoint, number one. Number two, in terms of distance, in those days, the Vedic society was spread across a large geographical area. So scholars from one region differed considerably in their viewpoint, in their ideas, in what they considered to be the ideal society and the ideal roles for each individual. That differed considerably from scholars from different other regions. Number three, although the Vedas reflect the ideal situation that was expected from the members of the society. But we need to understand that there was a lot of interaction with the non-Vedic people also. So certain of these traditions and their ideas kind of intermingled with the Vedic people. So there were influences from outside also. So when we look at this whole corpus of material that is available to us, we find a lot of variations because of these reasons as well. So most of the time, the present day scholars tend to align these diverse views in a chronologically vertical fashion, arranging, there is a tendency to describe the early Vedic period as more simpler and more homogeneous and more ideal than, say, the later Vedic period, especially with regard to the women. So generally in the textbook we come across the view that women were regarded as equal to men during the early Vedic period, and they were given all rights, and they were allowed to live life according to their own wish and predilections, which perhaps may not have been the case. The first section deals with the perspectives of scholars and critiques related to that. In this section, we'll be exploring various perspectives regarding women's sanskaras that have influenced the scholarly writings. We'll further dwell on a constructive critical inquiry into these perspectives. These sanskaras throw a lot of light on the rights of women in the Vedic society. They were allowed to participate in the rituals, and same kinds of ritualistic rights were available to the women is something which is important. And this is significant because today we do not see the same kind of rights being extended to the women. It is only the men who are by and large part of these rituals. So these rituals tell a lot about the importance that was attributed to the women in the Vedic society. We need to understand that the corpus of literature, Vedic literature that I referred to earlier, almost all the authors of these texts agree that all the samskaras which were meant for the men during the Vedic period, or especially the Rig Vedic period, were also meant for the women. So no kind of distinction was made between who can attend and what rituals were meant for either gender. This included very importantly what is known as the Yagnopavita or the Upanayana ceremony. The thread wearing ceremony is referred to as Yagnopavita in Sanskrit, and this is something which is today considered as the sole prerogative of the male, and that too of the twice born or the Dvija caste. So this was not the case earlier. In fact, there are many references within the literature related to the Rigvedic period referring to women also undertaking the thread wearing ceremony. So this is again significant. So as I said, this also meant that women were also considered as twice born, just as the men were. And this is also significant because the Yagnopavita is considered as the basis on the basis of which various rituals related to life as regarded in the Rigvedic period can be undertaken by such an individual. So accordingly, the woman could also after the Yagnopavita undertake education. She can undertake the sacrifices, the rituals of sacrifices. She can do various kinds of puja or worship related to the gods as mentioned in the Rig Veda, so on and so forth. So this in effect meant equality in a certain way for both the genders. This is the case in the Rigvedic period. In the other three Vedas, it is postulated by the scholars that there was an increasing complexity of social hierarchy leading to the exclusion of women from many ceremonies. So, this kind of differentiation is made where women after the Rigveda period were made to exclude in a certain way, in the sense that though they were part of the rituals, they were not allowed to participate, and they were made to forego their right to participate in the rituals to the men folk of their family. So this is something which is reflected in the later Vedic period. As we cross the Rigvedic period, we also see accordingly, the rituals reflect the fact that the position of the woman became lower with regard to the men during this period, as reflected in the lack of participation in the rituals. However, it seems that they were still in a much better position when compared to the later Vedic period. There are certain scholars of late who have been contesting this neat division of early Vedic and the later Vedic era with regard to the position of women. They are of the opinion that despite the participation of women in these various samskaras which was allowed in the Rigvedic period, did not necessarily make women equal to men in the society. It was important that in what way these samskaras were constructed, that seems to have made a difference with regard to the equality. As I said, women were part of the rituals, but they were not, these rituals were not designed in a way to allow women to undertake these rituals on their own. So that was that is considered as significant. It is further postulated that with the passage of time, women's status declined, and by the time we come to the period of the Dharma Shastras after the Vedic period, it was because of these subtle differences, gender differences that we see during the Vedic period, which allowed for this further degradation of women's society in the post-Vedic period, that is the time of the Dharma Shastras. And the Dharma Shastras definitely make a difference between man and the woman, and the women are accorded a much lower status than what was there earlier. In this study, we have taken the four Vedas along with the associated Upanishads, the Brahmanas and the Aranyakas as the canonical traditions. And with regard to the samskaras, which is the core of this talk, The Griha Sutras and the Dharma Sutras become very important, and these texts signify the end of the Vedic period. With this division in mind, we present the discussion on women's samskaras here. Samskaras are the rites of passage in Hinduism. Hindu religion in the Vedic times revolved around the idea of gods as reflected in the Vedas and the various ways of worshipping or approaching these gods. Basically, the idea of sacrifice or havan, as it is called in Sanskrit, and various hymns were addressed to each and every particular god to please that particular god and beget whatever that individual or the couple wanted from those gods. So these various sanskaras also signify the transition of a person, an individual, from one stage in life to another stage. So in addition to having spiritual significance, they also had they accorded a social status to that individual within the society. So every individual who was part of this Vedic society wanted to perform these various rituals and wanted to undertake these rituals related to samskaras so as to be able to assert his social position within the society. We get glimpses of the ways these rituals were undertaken, the various components of these rituals, and what they actually signified in effect in the society through, as I said, the four Vedas, which I already referred to, as well as the related corpus of literature that I referred to earlier. And these gave the number as well as the description and the ways in which these samskaras were supposed to be performed, and the times when they were different stages of life when they were supposed to be performed by the individual. These samskaras in the earlier times were, as I said, much more simplistic, but by the time we come to the period of the Griha Sutras and the Dharma Sutras, the picture becomes really varied, and we see a lot of heterogeneity and various perspectives being put forward by the various authors in different regions by this time. So accordingly, there are as many as 48 samskaras mentioned in the Gautama Dharma Sutra, whereas the various other texts give different numbers. Some say 12, some say 18. However, the most commonly mentioned samskaras happen to be number 16, 16 in number. So I have taken 16 as the standard number, and the common samskaras will be discussed here in detail. It is important here to mention that almost all of these 16 samskaras except for one relate to women in the Vedic period, and both men and women had to undergo all of these samskaras. The first and perhaps the most important, considered to be most important samskara is Vivaha or marriage, which is of course important for both men and women, and this particular ritual was considered to be important for both men and women, especially in order to continue the family line. So besides bringing together two people into communion, this ritual also established a household in the Vedic society. This was significant for the man as well, because without his wife, according to the Vedas, a man cannot perform any sacrifices or ceremonies. In order to undertake sacrifices or any kind of ceremonies which is considered as auspicious, it was required that a man should be accompanied by his wife. Perhaps we will remember that it's a story in the Ramayana where after Rama makes Sita go away, he is not allowed to perform the Ashwamedha Yaga. So, as a solution, a gold statue of Sita is made to, it is put beside Rama in order for him to undertake that particular Havan. As I said, this was considered as very important, Vivaha was considered as very important for both men as well as women. However, this does not mean that in the Vedic times marriage was mandatory. In fact, both men and women could choose to remain unmarried, and there are many references, especially in the Rig Veda, where men as well as women choose to remain unmarried. But in case of not being married, such individuals were not allowed to undertake these kind of ceremonies. The wedding ceremony itself varied from place to place and from community to community. In most cases, the wedding ceremony was observed around the sacred fire in the presence of the priest, family, and the kin. However, there were more simpler ceremonies were also available. The choice of more simpler ceremonies were available for both individuals. This idea of circling the sacred fire, what is today known as Saptapadi, that is walking around the sacred fire 7 times, seems to have come from the Grihya Sutras. Prior to that, this system perhaps did not exist, or it was not so important. With regard to other texts like the Parashara Grihya Sutra and Ashvalayana Grihya Sutra, there are different versions of how these ceremonies can take place, and some of them are very elaborate. Marriage partners during this time were ideally expected to be equal in education and status, and the consent of parents was not necessary in those days, and in most cases women had the right to choose her own husband. The second samskara being referred to in this text is Garbhadhana. This relates to the woman, and it is associated with her choice to have a child or the preparation to have a child. The verses from 10.184.1-3 of the Rig Veda relate to the desire for having a child, and Brihadaranyaka Upanishad recommends different kinds of food to be eaten in order to fulfill the desire for a daughter or a son. It is important here that in this Upanishad there are different options in terms of food to be eaten and the kind of lifestyle to be adopted in order to have either daughter or a son. So it is not always necessary that a couple should want a son. There were also, ways through which a daughter was she can be obtained, and it was also desired by many individuals. Thirdly, Punsavana. This samskara it was observed to ensure proper development of the fetus after the 3rd month of the pregnancy. Again, it is related to the woman who is on her way to becoming a mother. So this samskara was especially related only to the lady concerned. The 4th is Simanto Nayana. It is associated with the parting of expectant woman's hair, and it is observed for the normal delivery of the child. This ritual was found in various Griha Sutras, which contain diverse references about how and when it should be observed. Of course, this ritual is now obsolete, and it is not observed widely, if at all. It has been argued by scholars that all these samskaras show that are somehow part of the later development, and they were not part of the early Vedic period. However, an alternative explanation can be that there were diverse descriptions of various sanskaras in the various texts, as I referred to earlier, from region to region, from one scholar to another. So, different communities and different regions might have had different ways of undertaking these sanskaras. Jatakaruna, this sanskara deals with the celebration of the childbirth, and it is mentioned, as I said earlier, both the birth of a daughter as well as a son was celebrated, and daughters during this time were not unwanted. Namakarna samskara involves naming of the child. It was again celebrated for both boys as well as the girl. This is elaborately described in the Shatapatha Brahmana text. Nishkramana samskara was observed in the 4th month when the child is taken out of the house for the first time, and this is again explained in the Griha Sutras, and both boys and girls were treated equally in this ceremony as well. Annaprashna relates to the feeding of the child. It is observed when the child becomes capable of taking solid foods, especially around about the 6th month, and most Griha Sutras recommend various ways in which this can be celebrated. The Sankhyayana Griha Sutra recommends feeding the child with fish, goat, or partridge gravy. Again, there is a variation, a regional variation with regard to what can be fed to the child in the initial ages, in the initial days. It is observed again for both boys as well as girls. Chudakarna is the ceremony involving shaving off of the hair for the first time, and it is recommended towards the end of the first year of the child. Again, it was recommended for both boys as well as the girls. Karnaveda is a sanskara related to the piercing of the ears, where it was considered important for the girls, but boys' ears were also pierced. Similarly, the nose of the girl is also expected to be pierced. Vidyarambha sanskara is observed when the child begins the education. In the Vedic times, education was recommended for both boys as the girls, as we already discussed, and hence this sanskara was considered to be important for both of them. Upanayana or Yagnopavita, this was considered most important for the young child as it involves the wearing of the sacred thread for the first times. This was again recommended for both boys as well as the girls. Vedarambha was another significant samskara. It was a ceremony when the child was formally entered into an ashrama where the preceptor would get Vedic education for the first time, and this involved not only learning of the Vedas but gaining proficiency in all arts as well as crafts. In the Vedic period, it was recommended that both boys as well as girls should get educated before getting married. Hence, it was celebrated for both boys as well as girls, and both were sent to ashrama if the parents desired. Keshanta was the only ceremony or the sanskara which was meant for the boys, as it denoted shaving of facial as well as hair of the head after completing the education. Samavartana or snana was sanskara which took place at the end of the student's education and before he entered the householder's life. Since both boys and girls were recommended to get educated, this was imperative for both the genders during the Vedic period. Antyeshti was the last sanskara which involved cremating the deceased person on the funeral pyre, and it accompanied various elaborate rituals. Again, it was recommended for both boys as well as girls, like men and women in the Hindu religion. Again, the rituals related to this sanskara is described in various texts differently depending on which region and which age the individual died. We have seen that all the sanskaras which have been discussed in detail here, except for the Keshanta, which included shaving of facial hair, was meant for both men as well as the women. So as far as the Vedic vision went, it included both men and women within its fold. However, it seems that in real practice, we need to question as to how much, in what forms these rituals were actually followed by the Vedic people in the various communities and families. And this is something which needs to be researched further. The next important part of the talk relates to the system of Niyoga in the Vedic period. Niyoga denotes the practice by which a deceased person's wife is married to his younger brother in order to have progeny, and in case there is no younger brother, any other relative, male relative of the same family as her deceased husband was required to marry the widow. So the main idea was to get a male child through who there can be a smooth it can be ensured that the inheritance is passed on smoothly to the next line. So now this is something which is discussed in various recent scholarships, but this practice, it seems, was not so common in India even in the early period, and it is only in some communities, especially in the northwestern part of the Indian subcontinent, we find this practice being there. In the Vedas and the various texts related to the Vedas in the earlier times did not advocate Niyoga, and some Grihya Sutras and Apastamba and Bodhyayana they forbid the practice of Niyoga. However, certain other texts allow it if it is required, and the woman in question consents to that. Even the texts as late as the Manusmriti includes the prohibitory recommendation, although in some cases it allows if the community practices Niyoga. However, in almost all these scholars agree that it is better not to practice Niyoga. And nonetheless, the text of Mahabharata, for instance, we see several instances of Niyoga being practiced in it. So it seems that this practice was probably non-Vedic, but it entered into the Vedic society because of influences from various communities that they co-lived with. Yeah, we can see the representation of this practice in cinema of 1986, Ek Chadar Maili Si. This was adopted from Rajinder Singh Bedi's Urdu novel, a Niyoga practice that was survived in modern northwestern India. But as I said, this was not the case in rest of the India. So towards the end, we can say that while reading such textual references or looking at the popular kind of entertainment mediums, we must make allowances for the context and the frequency in which such practices were undertaken. As I said, there was a lot of variation within the texts, especially of the later Vedic period. So it is possible that this practice might have come from some other source and not from within the Vedic society. So last part of the talk deals with directions for future research. There is a need, of course, to further study the various literature related to this period, the Veda, the four Vedas and the associated Brahmanakas, the Upanishads and the Aranyakas. All these form a composite canonical corpus. And in order to understand the diversity of practices during the Vedic period, it is imperative that we understand these texts in the right context and the right sense. The Grihya Sutras and the Dharma Sutras should be used as a complementary text to understand the actual situation that existed during this time. The idea of Vedic society being a homogeneous one is something we need to contest, and we need to look beyond this idea of homogeneity. In order to understand the status of women, sanskaras and the rights of the women during the Vedic period, we can help, these texts can help us understand these issues in a much better light. And we also need to look at the fine line between the ideal vision propounded in these texts and the actual practices that existed in those days. So with this, I end this talk, and I hope that my talk has made a difference to this particular aspects to all the students who have been watching. Thank you very much.